No, 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 CBC, no, no. You made Northland Tales with taxpayer money, using taxpayer sets and costumes, and paid a world-famous director to fly in activists on the taxpayer dime. I mean, the least you can do is air the program. Is there a problem with that, CBC? Is there a problem with showing us what Northland Tales was supposed to be? May 20th, 2026. Welcome back to the Comic Reporter. This is what I live for. This will not be a funny video, the least, except it might actually be adjacent to funny, but it's not meant to be. No one knows better than me what happens when a joke misses the mark. No one. Not you, not CBC, not 22 Minutes. There are those in the political commentary audience that watch their chosen talking heads for the purpose of echo chamber reinforcement. No doubt about that. There are a small vocal minority who treat attacking people online like a fun little pastime, but are most likely the least affected by anything the government might actually end up doing. In fact, most of their communities are entirely robotic. Ask me how I know that. For them, the political battleground is nothing more than an arena of boredom relief and a way to inject a version of something resembling relevance into their ever shrinking sense of self worth. These people go after independent creators, legacy media and its reporters, politicians, pundits, and policy influencers alike. But no one gets as much attention from these jabbering hordes of insanely entrenched, malicious lunatics than the educated activist. People like Frances Widdowson, Lindsay Shepherd, Aaron Gunn. There's nothing that scares a militant moron more than someone who knows what they are talking about, and there's very little that makes them less happy than a display of intelligent authority, no matter how big or how small. So when Frances Widdowson got a call from an unknown media company called Forge Media, not the real one, asking for an interview about the residential schools and the Indigenous relations in Canada, I'm sure she was already a little bit suspicious. The CBC wanting anything to do with the Kamloops residential school debacle seems a little strange, maybe a little out there. It seems out there to me. I'm assuming it would have seemed pretty out there to her as well. If you weren't aware, Northland Tales was a production being manufactured by none other than Igor Vamos, an American filmmaker who is very generously referred to as a documentarian. Igor is known for his ability to bait his targets into scenarios using false premise invitations. The idea is to tell the expert in whatever field Igor was paid to undermine that they are attending an interview in support of their chosen field of expertise. But once they arrive in the interview devolves into a scenario that is so absurd that the victim loses their grasp on reality and participates in the bit just long enough to catch them saying something out of character on camera. I should point out that the only reason we have this video is because Frances Widdowson, unlike Lindsay Shepherd or any of the retired RCMP officers also ambushed with this particular setup, actually had the wherewithal to realize something was wrong and record the entire interaction herself. Francis blew the top off of the entire production, effectively killing it in its tracks, forcing the CBC into damage control mode because Francis Widdowson has an enormous brain shoved into a very small head. I don't understand how that works. Her head should be 3 times the size as it is. How are you not leaking everywhere, Francis? Not only do you defy logic, but you also defy physics. Some Canadians are just gifted. I, 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 I'm impressed. I'm going to add in here that comedy or content or satire like this is not explicitly bad. It's not decidedly bad in any way. Entrapment can be a great way to get criminals, murderers, various ne'er-do-wells, or liars using this method. I mean, it's extremely useful at times to get people to just say what they actually believe instead of performing a grift. I mean, activists in particular should probably be approached this way more often, just to get them to admit that they may not know exactly what they're talking about. The problem with this is that Frances Widdowson is a PhD in this. She's not grifting. She knows this stuff and has presented knowing this stuff and has made a career on knowing this stuff. So calling a show unscripted and then presenting a set so obviously constructed that you are able to dump a sack of previously prepared children's shoes on a table to provoke a response from a residential school expert is, well, it's not satire. You are treating Frances Widdowson as if she built the schools and is responsible for the tragedy. I mean, not only is this bad faith, it's entrapment. It's entrapment of a legitimate expert in the topic. And it proves that Northland Tales may not have even known who Frances Widdowson was. You didn't even do an ounce of research before trying to discredit someone whose life work is literally making sure we understand everything we need to know about the Indigenous history. And it also proves that Northland Tales knows nothing about John A. Macdonald himself. And the reason you know this is because if you had told Frances Widdowson that she was going to be involved in a satirical sketch about John A. Macdonald from the beginning, she probably never shows up to the interview. So instead, you had to tell her she was participating in a documentary. That's the false premise, just so we're all on the same page. Again, the intended audience for something like this is point Again, the intended audience something like this is pointed at is typically the extreme fringe of the political public discourse. The entire purpose of those rabidly dedicated sycophants is to make sure their chosen demon of the day is sufficiently owned, thus allowing them to continue following their chosen influential figure with a clear conscience and mostly empty cranium. But for the vast majority of Canadians who have not outsourced their ability to critically think and purposely evaluate the entertainment we choose to consume, a production that seeks to undermine instead of educate or entertain has become something of an obvious attempt at narrative manipulation. For the vast majority of Canadians, intent does not override method. See, here's the thing. Prank shows are fine. Satire can be fun. Both reveal some real truths about the human condition, and nothing about either lane of comedic creation is inherently wrong or bad. In fact, they're even a wonderfully cathartic method of stress relief or temperature reduction for a population that in Canada is approaching critical mass. The problem with Northland Tales is that it is satire in the same way decapitating a political rival is simply freedom of speech. If I cut his head off, some people will find it funny, therefore comedy. So let's qualify this. I'm continuing work on a 25 episode historical retelling of the life and times of every Prime Minister Canada has ever had. John A. Macdonald, it turns out, earned a reputation for being notoriously slow in his decision making and thus earned the nickname Old Tomorrow. That allowed me, in the satire, to paint him as a lazy and indecisive man who literally did nothing for a living during his first term. Is it true? Yeah, partly. It's truthful in the same way Mark Carney is actually a crisis and Pierre Poilievre is a raving lunatic. The fun part about satire is that it takes a truth and stretches it to its absolute extreme in the attempt to expose the reality of the man underneath the label. To create a satire that depicts John A. Macdonald as a racist, you'd have to ignore that Canada was at war with the Indigenous people and was looking for a way to end the war that didn't involve eliminating the people, something these documentarians obviously hadn't considered, as evidenced by the pile of children's shoes dumped on the table intended to represent the children who had lost their lives in the Kamloops residential schools. The irony here is that they are showing these shoes to Frances Widdowson, who is not only aware of how bad the residential schools could be, but is also well aware of how much of a scam the scandal about the mass graves at the Kamloops residential schools actually proved to be, simply through lack of any evidence whatsoever. $11 million and not a single body found. Huh, that's weird. I wonder where the money went. This actually makes me wonder if Igor himself has an active participant in the construction of the script, or if he was simply hired to make the script work. I'm not a fan of his methods, but I have to think he's smart enough to know that this type of gaslighting only works on people who don't have a deep knowledge of the subject matter. So, not Francis, Lindsay, or Aaron. The RCMP officers were probably a little more confused, but can you blame them? When's the last time you think they walked onto a prepared set for an unscripted event designed to make them look bad based on an event they'd already figured out never actually happened? Yeah, you would also be a little bit confused. So, anyways, that's the story of the show you paid for, but will likely never see. An activist named Frances Widdowson, you'd likely never heard of until now. And now you know the name of a man named Igor Vamos, who, though not a bad guy, likely, is more of what we call a culture jammer than documentarian he is painted as. But the biggest problem in this whole mess is how and why did the CBC greenlight this show? Were they not aware of the content? Did they not realize the production included deception and things within the realm of kidnapping or entrapment for those who are not in any way considered criminals outside of their political or social beliefs? Is the CBC now acting as the arbiter of truth instead of the distributor of fact? Was the CBC fully offload Has the CBC fully offloaded the idea that it owed its viewers anything even within the realm of value? Or is it all just satirically framed hit jobs on people who the CBC doesn't like because they know what they're talking about and their views are inconvenient to the causes that make the CBC and APTN money? I will mention I will mention here that the CBC has paused production on the Northland Tales production, likely specifically for these reasons. If it turns out that the methods used to gather the footage the CBC owns were less than, let's say, legal, possibly ethical, it's likely we'll never see this show hit the air, and thus we may never actually figure out what the end product would have looked like. And I don't think that's fair. I want this thing released. I want to see the end result. I want to know what the CBC knew, and I want full transparency on the depths CBC Entertainment are willing to go to discredit the activist Canadians they do not agree with. But most of all, I want to know why they greenlit a project that is promoting misinformation designed to make our relationship with the Indigenous population harder, when it's already straining under the weight of bad faith actors as it is. And the only way we'll ever know that is if the show gets released and the credits roll. I will say that there is a very small chance, minuscule even, a very small one, that Francis, Aaron, and Lindsay were well aware of the type of production they were walking into, and they are now using plausible deniability to build the value of their own platforms for a little bit more authority. But not one of them needs a whole lot more authority. Um, Certainly increase their visibility, but that's a level of conspiracy that I'm not sure holds a lot of value. Being involved with a production like this doesn't make you look good to the people you'd need to reach. So, no, I don't. You'd have to show some pretty heavy proof to change my mind that they probably didn't know what they were getting into. Again, and I'm not totally against productions like Northland Tales. Satirical representations or a version of entrapment can work very well to highlight that activists may not actually be as knowledgeable or as much of a authority as they would pretend to be. And it's actually for that reason that I think the Northland Tales needs to see the light of day. I mean, no matter what the CBC finds about how the information was gathered, a direct release to the public, maybe not of the show itself, but of the methods used to gather the information for the show. I mean, an admittance from the CBC that it owes its audience the truth would go a long way to proving that the CBC is not actually as into deception as it seems to be right now. And the reality is that if the CBC thinks it can sweep this kind of gaslighting under the rug, well, the audience is already proving it wrong, abandoning the CBC in droves for whatever corners of the internet they prefer. And the reality is that if they don't fix the bleeding soon, we don't need to just defund the CBC. People will ask for it to be dismantled.